All right, let's begin here. We've got a whole raft of questions. We'll see how many we can work through here. First of all, thanks, gents, for all your contributions, all your talks. Very encouraging. I'd like to start with, we live obviously in troubled times where there might seem to be everything unraveling everywhere, and we could be very easily overwhelmed with what battle to pick. I think, Nate, you talked last night about picking battles, aiming for challenge. If it's easy, you're failing. Maybe each of you chime in. What do you see as the wisdom of prioritizing the battles before us, and what battles we ought to be aiming at? What hills should the church be aiming to take in this dark hour? So feel free to chime in as you see fit.
The hill you should be fighting for is the hill you're on. Don't be worried about what you're going to do down the road or if this or that happens. You've got a duty station right now.
Yeah.
So your family right now, your congregation right now, your county, your town, your state right now,
yeah.
That's the hill you're to fight on. Because if you keep telling yourself, this is not a hill to fight on, this is not a hill to fight on, you'll discover down the road that there's never going to be a hill to fight on.
Right.
And so I would say simply start where you are. Yeah. As the hippies said, modifying it, fight where you're planted.
Right. Right.
And I'd say, I was going to answer the same thing, but just to add it's in line with the ordo amoris, the order of your loves and your proximal loves. God has placed you in certain structures that to order your world, your self-discipline, your home, and within that, don't neglect the day of small beginnings or despise them. And the very simple obediences that we should be participating in is always the place to start. Are you taking in the scriptures and meditating on them? Are you prayerful? If you're not praying and reading the scriptures and obeying the simple things, you've kicked one of the legs off of that three-legged stool of fruitfulness for the joy of Christ. So go after that and start your own personal life, build your home around those, and then look at the other spheres and the activities you're involved in. Just be faithful in the little things.
I think that the only thing I'd add would be household duties are universal, so everybody's got that one. Church duties are universal, so that's your household, your church. After that, you start to get into the realm of calling and vocation, where there's going to be lots of different people doing different things, but under the same broad umbrella. So some people are going to run businesses or work for businesses. Some people are going to run for office. And then those who run for office might make different political issues their bread and butter, where I'm leaning into this. I'm glad that somebody else is leaning into that, but I'm going to make this my thing, and I'm not going to I'm not going to act like everybody has to have the same priorities once you get outside the home, the church, things like that. Not everybody needs to be doing the same thing. In fact, it would be bad if we did. There's too many other things that we need to be doing, and so that's what has God called you? How's He equipped you? What has He stirred up? What provokes you? So one of the things I remember whenever we would do hiring when I was the president at Bethlehem, one of our key questions was from the passage that Dusty read, which is what provokes you? So like what idols, when you walk around Athens, what idols provoke you? What things, when you see them, cause a little bit of something more? And then it's an illuminating question, because there could be the wrong things that are provoking you. You're making mountains out of molehills and ignoring the big stuff. But oftentimes
the wrong pronouns.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so then, but at the same time, it could be that provocation could be the early stirrings of a call to prioritize something, to go build it, do it.
I would say that every battle, if we're really focusing on battles, every battle has a cost. There are no conflicts without a toll. Given where I work, I hear from a lot of Christians who feel suddenly called to take Hollywood for Christ. None of them are. And I know this without very many questions. They're not called to do this because the cost is total in all their other relationships and everything else, and even their own spiritual walk. we all know this about missionaries who felt called somewhere, and they immediately sacrificed all their children on the altar to their call. The cost was much too high and revealed that they weren't called to that battle at all. This can be true of people in their own town who feel called to start a school, who feel called to try to really preach the gospel and take their city for Christ. Start with your kids, start with your family. Don't lose and fail there and then expect that you have any call beyond that. Don't even worry about picking a battle unless your own little regiment is in shape and ready to go. Then you can start looking out, like Joe's saying, like find what provokes you and what you're called to, but also where you're willing to actually pay that price. So you're going to pay in your reputation, you're going to pay in your time, you're going to pay in money. There's all these different things that you could be charged for that battle, to try to achieve victory in that battle. There are some things that cannot be casualties. You are not allowed to put them on that altar, and just make sure that you don't.
So, agree completely. And adding just a couple handles on calling. There's an inward call that's maybe right, but you need to be a little suspicious over it, be sus. And then there's an outward call.
Because you are sus.
You are sus. That's a fact. There's an outward call that is the verification of those wise counselors around you and the infrastructure of care that God has put around you. Your elders, wise, your mom and dad, other wise counselors in the church, and other folks. And there's a way that these things will open up and you will see the will of God in these things. But it's not just, I feel called. Well, we need to seriously evaluate that, and anybody who's been around churches and pastors, they know that a call will take you to the demise of many churches just because they're emotions. But we need to really use that inward and outward aspects to evaluate those calls.
I'll just chime in, strongly agree with all of it. Start with your own soul, start with a clean heart, start with a happy marriage, happy family, faithfulness and all those things, and then just sort of piggybacking on what has already been said, I would say, and then what do you see is needed? What's the need? And then prayerfully and talking with people around you, see if other people agree that's the need, that you're and that you're a good fit for that need. Because remember, the need is not always the call. So maybe you're good at seeing the need, but it might not be yours to do. But I would say that's a good place to start.
So as you look at the upcoming bumpy ride of the next couple months, years, when you see
Groceries are going to be cheaper, Ben.
that's what I've been told. I've been told because there will be price controls, and that's never resulted in bare shelves. That's what I've been told. So as you look at our children, raising our children, how do we inculcate the jovial warrior ethos into our children? What are ways to be doing that practically?
It starts with how you handle the spilled milk.
Yeah.
Right. So if you freak out over that, if you can't run with men, how are you going to run with horses? Yeah. So every household has its daily bumps and skirmishes and difficulties, and you need to be composed throughout all of those situations. And if you are doing that, you're training your children to be composed, and then you can take it to the big time.
Don't stress out. Don't be outraged. Don't practice outrage. Don't practice freaking out anywhere.
Because they're trying to get you to be that way. Because when you are outraged, and then some people on our side traffic in rage porn, where they just try to get you whipped up. They're selling something. When they do that, they're selling something. Because people who are enraged generally make poor decisions. And you want to be in control of it's. If you lose your temper, that's ungodly. Right. But be angry and sin not. It says in Ephesians. There's a place for anger, but it's disciplined and it's under the control of the Spirit, and you're under the control of your own spirit. Don't be blah.
Yeah. Right. So to connect it again to Dusty, like Paul, one of the only times that Paul kind of seems to be out of sorts is in the passage. There's 2 times in the book of Acts where Paul kind of is out of sorts. One is the one he mentioned. He's provoked by the idolatry. But that provocation leads him to give a really great sermon, not just lose his mind, right? The other time is when they try to worship him. And he said, no! So like that, like those are the 2 times. He saw the idolatry, and then he was the idol for a minute. And he was, in both cases, there was a this, but it was never out of control. Like even the anger, even the this is wrong, God's glory is being trampled, didn't lead him to lose control, lose his temper. Instead, it was that provocation was then governed by his mind, by his stability, in order to do something strategic and wise and good.
The Philippian fortune teller annoyed him mildly.
But he still never tweeted in all caps.
That's right. Yeah. Caps lock.
Remember the Ents in The Lord of the Rings. This is one of the most greatest travesties of the movie series is what they did to the Ents and Treebeard in particular. But in the
Maybe
books,
top 5, Toby. Maybe top 5.
it was terrible. But in the way that Tolkien actually wrote it, it's a glorious picture of the kind of composure Joe was talking about, of being thoughtful, careful, seeking wisdom, counsel. But that doesn't mean they didn't do anything. It was not on the timetable that the hobbits might have initially preferred, but it didn't end up having. They didn't have to trick the Ents into action. The Ents came to a wise counsel, and then when they go to war, it's terrible. It's gloriously terrible, and we need to be pursuing that kind of meekness, that kind of self-composure.
But now I have doubts about Toby because he watched that far.
And he's quite upset now.
Darn.
You fell into a pit of your own making, Toby.
But I am repentant. I'm repentant.
Did you watch the extended version, though, is the question.
Yes. Dust and ashes.
That's
Dust
right.
and
That's
ashes.
right. Any emphasis as you raise sons versus daughters that, looking at the times ahead, thinking of how do you raise your sons to not be sent into these godless wars, or how do you raise your daughters in light of the fact that Congress wants to draft them into these godless wars? What are some of the emphasis points for sons and daughters that differ and contrast?
When the men have to do what the men have to do, they need to do it with the full support of their wives. So you don't want it might make good for good theater or something, but you don't want the man trying to go do what he needs to do with the wife pulling on his other arm. You want the whole family all in. Everybody understands what has to be done. When John Knox's daughters, one of them married a very fine preacher who had to leave England for health reasons, and then later under King James, he wanted to return to England, so he had to petition the king. And so John Knox's daughter came to the king to ask for permission for her husband to come back, and the king said, well, I'll do that if he agrees not to preach. And she lifted up her petticoat and said, I'd rather have his head here. All right, I'd rather have him have his head chopped off. And then whose daughter are you? Well, John Knox's. And then the king said something, well, the devil never made such a match. And she said, well, we never asked his permission. That's the kind of daughter you want,
right,
where she's not doing the fighting, but she fully supports the man who is going to be doing the fighting.
Nate made this point last night. This is the part you're supposed to answer, Nate, but I think it's really good. But there's nothing so awful as a woman who isn't supportive and is actually leading her husband astray and is counseling him against doing the very thing that he needs to do. He needs her wisdom. He needs her strength. But a woman really is powerful. The very first woman had that power and led the first man astray. And then I'll piggyback off of Joe with his allusion earlier to the movie Cinderella Man. It's a really beautiful scene in the movie when the wife initially says, I can't come. It's the biggest boxing match, and there's all this hype about Braddock getting killed because the man he was boxing had killed a man. And then she shows up at the end and says, this is the place. This is where I need to be at your side.
We do need more Spartan women. So you can just say,
With your shield or on it.
yeah, guys who are sitting there listening to their moms and to their wives saying, return with your shield or on it.
Right.
Don't come back a loser unless you're dead.
I think this is a confession time. And
Did you watch Lord of the Rings too?
what not to do.
But did you
No
watch
comment.
Rings of Power?
There,
That's
so
That's the real
shame of face.
I will not stoop to Toby's level. So for too long, I didn't recognize and dignify and utilize, you like that? The role that my wife served as a helper to me. And I overlooked her help. And so it disincentivized her helping me. And it weakened me. And it weakened her. And she didn't have the confidence in the Lord and the work of the Holy Spirit in her life to recognize, actually, this is good. And it was useful to my husband. I just kind of blew past. And I think if we're going to rightly ascertain what battles there are, we have to recognize I've got an internal battle of arrogance and pride in my own heart that wouldn't even recognize this incredible gift that God has given me and dignify her and listen and work together as a one flesh unit to fight those bigger battles. Instead of I'm getting tied up in these internal battles that are, I've got my legs tied and I'm trying to run out there. And so whenever some of that happens in a marriage, it's going to bleed out into our parenting, how we treat our girls and how we treat our boys, because we're going to build our girls to be that helper, and we're going to dignify them in that role that they're going to have someday. And we're going to teach our boys, you're not so isolate. You shouldn't create an isolated island for yourself as a husband with all your buds, and not recognize that one flesh union is not with your bros, and it's not with your group chat. It's not with the people who you're trying to win online. It's with your wife, and that really kind of puts a due north on those other battles.
Dusty, can you sketch for us how did you get into politics, and what have you learned since then? Not to depress us all, but and maybe give some advice. There's some of the questions that came in, young folks in particular, interested in the political sphere. What cautions, advice, counsel would you give in that regard?
They're either called to politics or Hollywood. It's one of those.
That's right. That's right. Well, as Rush Limbaugh used to say, Washington D.C. is Hollywood for ugly people.
Oh man, there's a lot in that. Oh, I've got to exercise self-control right now.
With that,
So how I got involved, it was a process. 2019 was going and speaking out against how the pro-life movement was treating abortion and just making all these concessions and bending and fearing the culture rather than fearing the Lord. And I started speaking out at the Capitol and kind of got a little more comfortable in an environment where pastors actually can apply the Word of God to the civil sphere. That really is a thing, and we hadn't seen it modeled really. The religious right and the moral majority did it, but that was a long time ago. Who's doing it now? What does that look like? And then 2020 came, and it was very disorienting for us personally as a church. We see all these mandates and closures and whether it's masks or vaccines. My dad was in a memory care facility, and they shut it down, and saying, how do I orient myself to what's going on. I didn't have that orientational infrastructure. And so that's whenever I started. I've said this before, reading and listening to some of what Doug was writing and what he was saying on his podcast, and then digging into the Vindicia contra Tyrannis and Slaying Leviathan by Glenn Sunshine, and Lex Rex and Althusius and others. And it brought us back to the confessions, the Reformed confessions. And we're saying we have such a rich wealth in our confessional heritage. We have just overlooked it. We've tossed it aside for some other cheap imitation confession, a statement of faith that everybody just passes around, and what could be the Baptist Faith and Message for that matter. And we found in there a great wealth. And so in that process, I started going and interposing for our members at city council meetings, and spoke at the city council meeting in our town and told them, you have no jurisdiction given by God to exercise authority over these people they're innocent, they're healthy, they've done nothing wrong, you don't have jurisdiction. And there wasn't a pandemic in our area, really. And it wasn't a pandemic of death, it was sickness. And you don't have the right to force them to do these things. Anyway, some of the church members wanted us as elders to take jurisdiction and force mask mandates, or put vaccinated people up here and unvaxxed back there. And we said, we don't have the justification from God to do that. It's not our authority. I spoke at the Elgin City Council, the City Council in Medicine Park, which is another town in our district, and I spoke at the Lawton one, which is the third biggest town in Oklahoma. And here's the interesting bit of providence. Let me just skip up to 2020. We started then teaching about the law and the gospel and the relationships, and we started teaching. We became confessional in 1689. Sorry, guys. And we're brothers. Right? It's a brother document. It's a brother.
We love having you.
We're not freaking out.
I can see this.
I'm mildly annoyed.
It's because you've been emotionally sabotaged.
Well played.
Anyway, long story short, we started teaching through Deuteronomy, and a Senate seat came open in our district. It was an open election. The guy who was running it conveniently became the Chamber of Commerce CEO and got a nice six-figure job, his golden parachute. And there's a lot there. And I told the people in our church, like, of all the people in our district, people in our church are more ready. They're more capable and prepared to fill this role than anybody else in this a couple 100,000 people around. And we prayed for a month, had a final prayer meeting, and myself and another elder put himself forward. And after an hour of praying, the church commissioned me and charged me to go take up this role. And so we campaigned. The three opponents that I had in the primary, Republican opponents, one was at the Lawton City Council meeting, whenever I spoke against the mask and vaccine mandates, told them that Christ was king and they didn't have jurisdiction. She was speaking in favor of them all as the representative from the state medical board and the county medical board. So we had video of me defying everything that she was saying. So there's that touch point. I was able to run against her on that very simple fact, defy tyrants. The Medicine Park mayor was one of the other opponents. I had video from that. This was 3 years before. The other opponent was our city mayor, and he has a publication where he ripped on me and mocked me for being part of the Southwest Oklahoma Freedom Fighters and defying the mandates. So in God's providence, 3 years later, there's no way I could have known. I could not have orchestrated it. We had all this documentation, video evidence to say, this is the only one who stood against the tyranny that was coming upon us. All these others actually pursued it, and we won. And then we won the general as well. They spent $1.5 million-ish against me. There was dark money coming in from several other states, and I spent in total around $80,000. So we, as a church, knocked
And
6,000
5 small rocks.
5 small rocks. As a church, we knocked 6,000 doors twice. Our ground game was very powerful. There's a lot to be said, but what I've learned is, I think the most important thing is what I am doing as a pastor. I'm bivocational. It's a seamless involvement in what I do at the Capitol. I go, they give me a topic, I apply the word to it, whether it's in a committee hearing or on the Senate floor or in their offices. Here's what the Word of God says, and the Constitution affirms it or denies it. We need to change these things. It's really no different. And so I feel very equipped to do that. What I have learned is I have to beef up on my economics, and I think I read 3 or 4 economics books the first month that I went in. I had to beef up on tax code, and I learned tax code. I read a book called Pirate Money on how to get transactional gold in place rather than our paper money to hedge inflation. There's stuff like that. I had to learn a lot, but I had the theological underpinnings to be weaponized.
Any counsel so that young folks interested in politics? Is it stay away, or here's the cautions? How to navigate those waters?
Yeah, the first thing is you need to learn how to order your own life under the law of God before you want to go and order anybody else's. That's our problem. We have a bunch of people who have not ordered their self, ordered their home, or much less their business according to the law of God, and they think now somehow that they're qualified to direct and govern other people.
And because they don't do that, when they get into office, they go native. They get assimilated almost right away. At least usually one election cycle, they get digested.
Yeah, they're not very deep in there's a lot of them that are Christian in our area, but they haven't been to a church that's preached like this. It's been a seeker-sensitive type of a church that always looks to the culture, and it doesn't fear the Lord. And so when they get into that pressure cooker, they're going to tend to do what the middle of the caucus wants. And they end up spineless often because they're looking to the voters. They're looking to the lobbyists and the agencies who are going to give them money in their campaign coffers so that whenever they run next time, they might be able to win.
Toby?
They're still seeker sensitive.
Exactly.
Right. So I know there's a lot of attendees from not from Moscow that have come and visited. Doug, this is maybe a question for you to start with. How do you counsel them to take some of what we're doing here in Moscow? How do they take it back home? How do they implement it? How do they oftentimes hear, well, we want what's going on in Moscow happening here in our neck of the woods? What's your counsel to that?
Yeah, the counsel is this. Basically, Christopher Dawson, the historian, said the Christian church lives in the light of eternity and can afford to be patient. Right. So I would say patience is the big thing, because what's happening is people come here. It's like going to your neighbor's house for dinner, and they've got an exquisite dessert, and you look at the dessert in the oven 5 minutes before it's to come out, and you want to go home and duplicate that right at that stage. You want the dessert 5 minutes before it's ready. Well, what's happening here is the grace of God. We're so grateful, but it's decades. This is decades, and Moscow didn't look anything at all like it looks now for the first 10 years, and then the second 10 years didn't look anything like the first 10 years. So basically, to co-opt a phrase from Nietzsche, it's a long obedience in the same direction. So start where you are, your family, your church, whatever the faithful territory that you have, whatever that is, shore it up, fortitude to defend it, and then say, how can we extend the perimeter from where we are? So don't try to step into someone else's story at a later chapter, basically. This can be done in other locations, and we want to export it, but you have to start the recipe at the beginning.
Any other comments on that? Doug, you've counseled before on your blog in particular not to take the bait, and I have a hunch that in the next couple months there will be lots of bait laying out for conservative conservative evangelicals. What are some of the principles that guide the doctrine of the lesser magistrate? How should the church be preparing for the bumpy road ahead, the bait that's going to be put out in front of us, the rage that you talked about earlier?
So here's the thing. When the bait is put out, you need to look at the story, recognize the arc of the story, and look at ask the question, what are they trying to get me to do? What do they want me to do? And then don't walk into that trap. All right, so J6 incursion was a chocolate pie that the progressive left fell into. What I mean by taking the bait is the J6 incursion. That was just not thought through. It was not an insurrection. It was just chaotic taking the bait. What you need to do is ask when it is egregious. Let's say the election is manifestly stolen. Everybody knows, something like that, and everybody knows that it is. Ask, okay, that's not enough for me to go do some crazy thing. What I need to do is say, what do they not want us to do? What should our play be? And I don't think the play ought to be man the barricades, because they can use that. That's what they want. It shouldn't be a J6 type of thing. They can use that. I've argued on my blog that if it gets really, really bad, I think that we need to take a play from Solidarity in Poland. So no government at all can withstand a general strike. If everybody says, turns out I've got COVID, you've taught me many good lessons. I'll be down in the basement. So basically, I think there needs to be an organized thing that they can't do anything about. That there's no countermeasures. They can't call you an insurrectionist because you've just got the flu. And yeah, well, that's it.
I think resistance is a incredibly different story than aggression.
Yes.
So if you have massive noncompliance, some of the biggest, best advances we made locally that bore fruit to this day internationally consisted of resistance. Like the psalm saying without masks, that we continued to worship, Logos School continued to be in session. Like it was just, we're doing our thing and you have to try to stop us, and we're gonna resist these rules and resist these restrictions that are all unconstitutional and unbiblical and everything else. That's what we're gonna do. Going to the Capitol and smashing a window and going in is a different thing and puts you immediately in the wrong part of the narrative. So if there were a mandatory gun buyback program, I think you can imagine how well that would go in the Western US or the Southeast. But if that were immediately via executive order put in place, you could expect massive resistance.
What if at the mandatory gun buyback, you set up a booth right next to theirs? We will buy back your guns. You're the alternate booth.
10% markup of whatever they're giving. Sure, yes. But the point is that absolutely not, no, we're not going is a much easier position than we're here, we're queer, chant, and trying to do it that way.
Yeah, and I also think it's important. A lot of conservatives still get stuck on the two tiers, like riots are the voice of the unheard, unless it's, the British protesting rises and rapes, right? Then all of a sudden riots are, insurrections, we got to put them down. Just, you can't whine about it. Like, yes, it's hypocritical, it's two-tiered, it's not fair, it's unequal weights and measures being applied. So don't deny it. Like, don't pretend like that's not true. Like, see it and then work with it. Like, okay, what does that mean then strategically? But it does no use to just gripe about the fact that if the left does it, they're going to get applauded, bailed out. It's not going to be a problem at all. They can burn Minneapolis and it's fine. But if you did that, it would bear fruit for years on the left because they would use it as an example of what the right always does. And so that's just that the devil doesn't fight fair, so don't expect him to, and stop whining about it. Instead, figure out how to
Just
actually
win.
Just
Just
win.
win.
Yeah, win. Don't
It's
whine about
easy.
it.
So here's the one other thing that's really crucial, and that is Dusty earlier referred to the lesser magistrates. As we recover Protestant resistance theory, Vindicii, Lex Rex by Rutherford, Glenn Sunshine's got a great history, Slaying Leviathan, Althusius. There's a whole body of robust Reformed Protestant resistance theory. The theology is all worked out. One of the key things that we have to relearn is that, and this is in Rutherford's Lex Rex, the authorities that exist are established by God, Romans 13. But they are not established by God through the president or through the king and then filtered down to the lesser magistrates. Each magistrate is appointed by God directly. All right, so that's a key element in Protestant resistance theory. That means the sheriff, that means the county commissioners, that means your mayor, that means your governor is not holding office beholden to the president or beholden to some higher magistrate. Each magistrate answers directly to God. And one of the things we need to be praying for is for lesser magistrates, Calvin in his book 4, to become aware of their authority and their responsibility before God to provide a shelter for people to resist without being disobedient. And that's what it boils down to. I can resist tyranny from the top while submitting to an authority I've been submitted to my entire life. And that's what the American War for Independence was. They were submitting to the governments they grew up under and had been in existence for centuries, and they were submissive, but they were resisting a higher tyranny. And this is it's not special pleading, it is a tightly reasoned biblical way of thinking.
Just to add on to that, Vindicii, it particularly adds the notion of covenant to all of this. And so in the same way that everybody has been made very much aware of the fact that an abusive husband can break covenant to such a degree that the wife is perfectly justified in seeking a remedy to that situation. The same thing is true in the church. An abusive pastor or elders, there's appeal to God. You've broken covenant. You're disobedient to God. In the same way, the same basic covenant theology was worked out in Vindicii regarding civil magistrates. Those civil magistrates, because they have their authority from God, they're in covenant. There's a covenant agreement. And when they disobey the Lord who put them in place, they're breaking covenant and breaking covenant with their people that they owe allegiance to. And because of that, you can seek out godly magistrates to help you remedy that situation.
And the lesser magistrate the American system is inverted because it's a representative government. We, as the people, rule over our representatives by our vote and by our involvement in our government, so we can pull them back. Now, we've had some amendments that have weakened our power, the 14th, but we still have a representative system that we need to recognize. They are our servants, and we are accountable to them and to God. And America the citizenry of America has not been taught their power, their authority to call back our representatives.
There's a great new book by Romans Roads Press on, it's Elizabeth Landis's book, Forgotten Realm. There it was, Forgotten Realm. They're right down. He's down here in front. Forgotten Realm. But what it does is it is a kind of a primer on how the American system works, kind of at each level, and it's an educational tool to help you. And it'd be the sort of thing that would be good to give to if you live in a red state or a red county or something like that. It'd be the kind of thing that you'd say, hey, you should read this. And I think even just at a very simple, practical level, encouraging your local sheriff or whoever, and just saying, hey, we know the world's kind of crazy. Like, actually send them a little note that just, hey, we know the world's kind of crazy. But if he's a good guy, saying, and we know that if everything went belly up, we know that you do the right thing. And just get in his ear a little bit about, hey, you have this, and we're behind you. Because a lot of times, this is true of all kinds of leaders, it's the loudest people that kind of become the representative of how I should navigate. And so there's a bunch of quiet people who think, and this is what happens, like this is what happened in COVID. All it took was a few people going, but no, and then everybody comes running and rallying to that flag because there was one guy who said no. But there was a whole bunch of people that were looking for somebody to say no. And so you want to be encouraging your local authorities, hey, if you need to say no at some point, because that's what would be the right thing to do, you need to know we're behind you.
I can tell you, in a lot of ways, just one constituent in the face of their representative at whatever level can shift the course of that person's action, of that representative's action, because they fear men, because they are seeker sensitive, and it's the right seeker in front of them, then you can bend them. And I'll tell you one example.
Dusty's telling you to like try to sabotage your representative, like get their big steering wheel on their back and be like, hey, I'm just gonna pull you that way.
Just tell them we'll be watching you.
That's right.
Our eyes are on you. There was Senate Bill 13. It was an abolition bill, and the Senate wouldn't allow it to be heard even. They wouldn't hear it in committee, so they had to go around, change the rules, and bring it out of committee to the floor. And there was a vote, so someone moved to table it. We're going to table it. That would effectively kill it. And there was going to be a vote that afternoon. I went to the Capitol, started meeting with all these people, and my representative, my senator, I went to his office and finally found him, and I said, I heard you're weak on abortion. No, I came up here. I was a youth minister. I came to fight for abortion. He starts crying and everything. And I said, if it's that important, why did you vote against this? Why wouldn't you let it be heard? Well, he goes on about why he has good reason. I said, it's not a vote on whether it's going to pass the Senate or not. This is just a vote on whether it can be heard, whether we can even debate it, whether the merits of the argument can stand. And after he cried a little bit, and I challenged him really hard, pretty persuasively.
Were you sitting on him?
He's bigger than me. But look, make open statements of the truths of the conscience, and let the light of God bear down on that conscience. And just that simple interaction, he came out of that meeting, there were 4 votes to hear the bill and not table it, and his was 1. But whenever he came back onto the Senate floor, this was 5 years ago. Whenever he came back onto the Senate floor, the Senate leadership, the pro tem, the floor leader, the minority floor leader, all these people were coming over here, and there was just pressure on him. And he was emotional and losing it. And he voted still for it, just because I stood in his office and I told him, you know what God says. You call yourself a Christian. What are you going to do? Here's what the Bible said. And I went through a lot of offices, and they were so mad. Would you challenge my Christianity? Look, your conscience is doing that for me. I'm not doing that. Why are you so emotional? Sabotage.
One final question. It was directed to Joe, but I'll open it up to all of you for final word. Basically, can you give practical examples where Christians are being wimps, where we're backing down from fights we need to be having, where we're lacking courage? I mean, there's plenty, right?
Can we try to find some where they aren't?
There you
It
go.
might be a shorter
You
list.
can, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, are there any where they're not being wimps? Anybody think of any? I can't think of a single place where Christians are not being wimps.
Touche. Next question.
I mean, here would
Uganda.
So if you're looking for one that would maybe be, I don't know, like it's a little bit surprising or whatever, I think parents and teenagers in tech
Yeah.
is a place where you don't often think about it, but like the pressure, everybody's got this or has this ability or whatever, it's a real easy place to just want to like make that go away by giving in and allowing them to have the thing without any protections or to do whatever the certain people on their baseball team or whatever. Like, it's a real hard place, and it does require fortitude to go like, no, what is actually good? And there's wisdom involved in terms of what kind of thresholds and how you shepherd them, especially as they're in those teenage years. But I think that's a particular hard place that requires some courage to really engage. So that'd be one that's like that's not out there in the culture, but it really does matter.
Yeah, it's huge.
I would say the prime example currently would be the knots that ostensibly Reformed Christians are tying themselves into in order to get away from the implications of Christian nationalism. It's not a partisan political thing. It's right out of the book of Acts, as we heard in this last talk. It's straightforward. What does God want the nations to do? He wants them to repent. He wants them to come to God. And something struck me during Dusty's talk. When Paul was walking around Athens, he saw the altar to the unknown God. It wasn't in the lecture hall of the devotees of the unknown God. It wasn't a private venue. These were public works statues. These were things set up by the city of Athens. And he was talking to the city of Athens about this particular God that they were honoring, but they didn't know. And so he was calling Athens to faith. That's what he was doing there. And so the David French was probably the most recent egregious example of how he's going to vote for Harris, or whoever.
Michelle, Hillary, whoever it ends up
Hillary,
being.
Obama. He's going to vote for Harris to save conservatism from itself. Now that is an epistemological pretzel that he's tied himself in.
You have to burn down the village in order to save it.
It's just, I have to save conservatism. Whatever happened to the character issue? Anyway, that kind of convoluted reasoning is pervasive in Reformed intellectual circles. It's just a sinkhole of incoherence. And they won't acknowledge. It's just very fancy, two kingdom, this, and you have to understand, and you have to have 3 years of graduate school to think like that.
I think that one
Midway.
Yes. The most important things for people to do is to try to find believers who have not wussed out. And even if you disagree with them on many things, if you share a common standard and they are not going to wimp out, they're not going to wuss out, then you can make a lot of progress together. The fact that a bunch of Christians, the majority of Christians, wussed out, wimped out about worshiping God in COVID. They just said yes, sir, and locked the doors on sanctuaries and then persecuted members of their own congregations who wanted to still worship. There's not anything that's going on in culture that Christians have not wimped out on and are not currently wimping out on. But there are many pockets of resistance and there are many pockets of faithful believers, and you need to find those people and be with those people wherever they are. That's probably the most important thing, is to get with them, the people who will not wimp out on issues. When they see instruction in Scripture, they're not going to flinch. And you can disagree on many, many, many things if you share that, and you really can have fruitful community together.
Just real quick, I think I've been shocked to see so many pastors wimp out and actually treat like war against what I'm doing, rebuke me for crossing double spheres while they're a dad too.
That's a political statement, right? When they make that,
Yeah,
they rebuke you?
yeah. But I was telling Doug after I walked down, he said thanks and Christian nationalism in one text. And I said, yeah, the interesting thing is I went up there and as a politician, preached a sermon. And whenever I go to all the campaign stops, I preach a sermon, but I'm a politician. I haven't done, and I preached a similar message in my own church as a pastor. What we don't have is enough pastors who are strong they're capable of preaching the scriptures in any context. There's just some kind of invisible wall, some force field at the very, whether it's the city council or the local level up to the state or national level. There's just some kind of two kingdom invisible wall that they cannot penetrate. And I think that is a travesty.
I told Toby that it was like a Baptist, Christian, hedonist, nationalist thing happening right there. Like, quote and Piper, check. Supremacy of God, check. Altar call, check. William Wallace, check. It was like, oh, we're getting it all. Okay, it's good.
The perfect package.
Well, during the War for Independence, I mean, it was the British referred to the pastors who were leading the charge as derisively as the Black Robe Regiment. It was the Presbyterian pastors who frequently preached in black robes. Everybody knew they were the ones leading the charge, at least in terms of what is Christian liberty, what has God said, no king but Christ. Back to the original question, I was just going to mention, I do think that in our day, the thing that we should not miss that is a sign of growing courage and spine is the massive Christian education movement. The fact that so many Christian parents have said that we're going to make the sacrifices to make sure that our children grow up in the Lord is massive. Whether homeschooling or co-ops or online or the traditional classical Christian schools, that's massive. And of course, there are temptations there too where people can still wimp out, having, doing stuff just because the crowd's doing it. Everybody in my church homeschools, so that's what I have to do or whatever. But the principle is Christian education, and that really is a place where I think there's really encouraging signs of life.
Well, with that, let's give a round of applause to the speakers. Thank you, gents, for all you did.